Question: what is the original sin of humankind? Answer: confusing our neurology for ontology. The fundamental dilemma for humanity is that we're wired to conflate our present brain state with how reality truly exists apart from ourselves. In doing so, we often forget that our subjective experiences can be inaccurate or misleading representations of our objective environment. There are good evolutionary reasons for this. Our mental maps help us find food, ward off enemies, secure shelter, locate mates, and protect our offspring. Yet, our internal projections can be deeply deceptive, especially when our normally stable waking state is biochemically altered. Conditions like Alzheimer's, dementia, amnesia, bipolar disorder, or fever-induced delirium radically shift how we interpret the world. We can also intentionally modify consciousness through various drugs, each providing its own lens for seeing ourselves and others. In religion, entire movements have been founded by individuals convinced that their inner visions and inspirations came from God or a higher power. That these so-called revelations might simply be products of their own minds is rarely considered, since subjective evidence can feel too overwhelming to doubt. This is the perpetual conundrum. Given the abundance of mystical experiences and a universal tendency in the brain to produce them, how should we interpret these apparently transcendental excursions? More pointedly, how do we best evaluate and explain them? Scientific friends who disagree. Richard Feynman, 1918–1988, is renowned for his groundbreaking contributions to quantum electrodynamics, QED, for which he won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1965, along with Shinichiro Tominaga and Julian Schwinger. What may come as a surprise is that Feynman was also fascinated by out-of-body experiences, OBEs, and became skilled at inducing them after meeting John Lilly, 1915–2001, a pioneer in dolphin research and the creator of sensory deprivation tanks in the 1950s. Though the two became friends, they differed sharply on interpreting inner experiences during OBEs. Feynman maintained that such phenomena were purely hallucinatory, while Lilly believed they uncovered realms beyond rational understanding and the limits of empirical science. Feynman recalls first meeting Lilly. "I used to give a lecture every Wednesday at Hughes Aircraft. One day I arrived early and was chatting with the receptionist when about half a dozen people walked in. A man, a woman, and several others I didn't recognize. The man asked, 'Is this where Professor Feynman is giving some lectures?' 'Yes, it is,' the receptionist replied. He then asked if his group could attend. 'I don't think you'd like them much,' I said. 'They're pretty technical.' Eventually the woman realized I must be Feynman. It turned out the man was John Lilly, who had done some work with dolphins and was now researching sensory deprivation. 'Isn't it true you can get hallucinations in those tanks?' I asked excitedly. He confirmed it, and I was eager to try, having always been intrigued by the images generated by dreams and how the brain conjures them. I had once thought about trying drugs, but I got scared. I loved to think and didn't want to risk damaging the machine. Lying in a sensory deprivation tank seemed to carry no significant physiological danger, so I was very eager to give it a shot. The Lillys graciously invited me to use theirs. Although Feynman accepted Lilly's invitation, he scoffed at the mystical interpretations swirling around the tanks, calling them mystic hokey-poke, wick-wack stuff, and all kinds of gorp. Nevertheless, he found the experiences themselves deeply absorbing. With repeated sessions in the saltwater tank, he became adept at leaving his body and encountering remarkable phenomena. As he recounted, "I had many types of out-of-the-body experiences. On one occasion, I saw the back of my head with my hands resting there. When I moved my fingers, I saw them move, but there was only blue sky between my fingers and my thumb, obviously a hallucination. Yet the movements matched exactly what I felt and imagined. The whole vision would appear, then line up perfectly with my actions, much like the process of waking up in the morning, feeling something against you, and only gradually realizing what it is. Except here, my sense of self was positioned behind my head instead of in front of it. All the while, Feynman remained scientifically skeptical, despite growing disorientation from his OBE experiences. He also tried hard to differentiate these episodes from mere dreams. One of the things that repeatedly concerned me was whether I'd fallen asleep and was just dreaming. That would have defeated my purpose. I'd already had plenty of dreams. I wanted something new. But when you're hallucinating like that, you're not exactly at your sharpest. I did these goofy checks to ensure I wasn't asleep, rubbing my thumbs together, for instance, feeling their texture. Of course, I could have been dreaming that too, but I knew, deep down, I wasn't. Eventually, when I calmed down, I could sustain these long hallucinations. Feynman never believed these OBE visions were anything other than fantastic, ultra-lucid hallucinations, a term he used repeatedly. This stance annoyed Lilly, who reprimanded Feynman in a letter for being unscientific. Lilly had experienced what he believed were encounters with otherworldly beings in his own deprivation tank, usually amplified by drugs like ketamine, and he insisted these entities were real. Feynman, despite having had similar experiences, consistently labeled them hallucinations, which offended Lilly enough to write Feynman that he stopped being a scientist the instant he used that word. Feynman countered that, since these inner events didn't align with anything outside his mind, despite his initial conviction they might, he concluded, "The imagination that things are real doesn't represent true reality. If you see golden globes several times and they talk to you, that doesn't mean they're an external intelligence. It just means you had that particular hallucination. I believe nothing in hallucinations connects to anything beyond the internal psychological state of the person." Feynman's remark neatly encapsulates his critique. If you see golden globes or something like them multiple times and they converse with you during your hallucination, that doesn't mean they're another intelligence. It simply means you're experiencing a hallucination. Such skepticism might be mocked by those convinced OBEs reveal more than phantasmagoria. But could Feynman's hypothesis, that these visions are nothing but hallucinations, apply to religious experiences in general? This question spurred me to ponder how a mystic like Sri Ramakrishna would respond. Ramakrishna, a Bengali saint, had frequent vivid visions, sometimes daily. As the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna records, he describes his first vision of the mother. "I felt as if my heart were being wrung like a wet towel. I was overwhelmed by the fear I might not realize her this lifetime. Life no longer seemed worth living. Suddenly, I spotted the sword in the mother's temple and decided to end my life. I seized it like a madman. Then in that moment the Blessed Mother revealed herself to me. Every building, every structure vanished, leaving no trace behind. In their place I saw a boundless, infinite, radiant ocean of consciousness. Waves from every direction rushed toward me with deafening roars, as if to swallow me up. Gasping for air, lost in that surge, I collapsed unconscious. I don't know what happened in the outside world, but inside me flowed a steady stream of undiluted bliss so completely new, and I felt the Divine Mother's presence." When he regained some awareness, the word mother lay on his lips. Would modern neuroscience dismiss Ramakrishna's ecstasies, attributing them to undiagnosed temporal lobe epilepsy? Is that too reductive a diagnosis? It's one of those intriguing parallels that in the same year Ramakrishna died, 1886, another visionary, Baba Fakir Chand, 1886-1981, was born in India. Although Ramakrishna died at 50, Fakir Chand lived to 95. Both had powerful spiritual visions almost at will. But unlike Ramakrishna, Fakir concluded such experiences were mere mental projections and thus illusory. Like Feynman, he believed his visions weren't objectively real. In The Secret of Secrets, Fakir explains, "My form appears in America, Africa, and different parts of India, but I remain unaware of those who meditate on me. I've lifted this mask of fancy, while some other gurus exploit the myth to impress their unsuspecting followers. I don't blame these gurus entirely. Their disciples too seem to delight in the illusion." Researchers like John Lilly and Terence McKenna argue that calling inner experiences, whether from psychedelics or meditation, merely hallucinations ignores their broader significance. As McKenna said, "All these motifs center around DMT, likely because DMT produces a miniature version of the epoch shift in a single individual's experience. It lifts the mind from ordinary space and time, offering a glimpse of the grandest possible framework of being. When Plato said, "Time is the moving image of eternity," he captured exactly what DMT trips reinforce. It reveals a realm beyond death. And what does DMT show us about that domain? If we trust our perceptions, it's populated by an ecology of souls, creatures of information, and exuberant self-expression. The afterlife seems closer to a playful Celtic fairyland than a grey void. At least, that's the DMT evidence. The problem with Feynman's "it's all hallucinations" viewpoint is that it can lack nuance and discourage deeper exploration of the mind's frontier. Even though Fakir ultimately deemed inner visions illusory, he still meditated and had experiences beyond light and sound. Feynman noticed how in each vision, the content directly linked to what he'd already been thinking or talking about. He also emphasized we shouldn't confuse these imaginary voyages with reality, though he apparently failed to persuade Lilly. As Feynman recounted, "I wondered if hallucinations, like dreams, are influenced by what's already in your mind or by your daily concerns. The reason I had an out-of-body experience, I suspect, was because we were discussing OBEs right before I went into the tank. And the reason I hallucinated about how memories are stored in the brain might be because I'd been pondering that problem all week. I had extensive discussions there about reality in experimental science, how if a phenomenon repeats itself for multiple observers, it's usually called real. So if many people see golden globes repeatedly, that suggests the globes are real. I argued that prior talk about golden globes planted the idea in the participant's mind, so that person conjures some approximation, maybe they're blue, for instance, and thinks they're reproducing the experience." Fakir would concur, suggesting that religious visions derive from leftover waking experiences that get magnified astrally when consciousness shifts. He himself once had an incredible vision of his guru, Maharishi Shiv Bhat Lal, complete with the correct ashram address, before ever meeting him. Initially, Fakir saw this as a miracle. Later, however, he realized he likely encountered a photo and the address beforehand, unconscious of having done so, and subsequently wove them into a startling religious perception. This makes sense, as Shiv Bhat Lal was a prolific writer whose work circulated widely. Sam Harris, the well-known author and neuroscientist, harshly critiqued Dr. Eben Alexander for claiming to have proof of heaven based on a near-death experience. According to Alexander, quoted by Harris in his piece, "This Must Be Heaven," "I was a speck on a butterfly's wing amid countless other butterflies. We soared through blooming flowers, passing blossoms that unfurled as we flew. There were waterfalls, pools, indescribable colors. Above us floated arcs of silver and gold light pouring down beautiful hymns. I later called them angels. A fair term, I think. Then we left our universe. Everything receded, and I sensed I was in an infinite black void, comforting yet indescribably vast. I was there with a divine presence I couldn't see or describe, along with a brilliant orb of light. They said they had much to show me, and they did. The whole higher-dimensional multiverse appeared as an incredibly intricate, corrugated sphere full of lessons." Harris points out how closely this resembles Terence McKenna's accounts under DMT, suggesting Alexander may be mixing a neurological state with an ontological one. Harris writes, "Alexander believes his E. coli-infected brain couldn't have produced such visions because they were too intense, too hyper-real, too vivid and personal for any healthy brain to conjure. He also argues they couldn't have occurred during the minutes or hours when his cortex, which surely never fully shut down, was rebooting. Yet he's apparently unaware of what people experience under potent psychedelics. Visions like McKenna's require only a brief span of actual time. Unlike LSD and other long-acting psychedelics, DMT's effects last mere minutes. Alexander would have had more than enough time to enter a visionary ecstasy as he emerged from the coma, whether or not his cortex was fully online. For all we know, his brain spiked with DMT, a natural neurotransmitter, or even ketamine, an anesthetic occasionally used to protect a traumatized brain. That's speculation, but it's far more plausible than claiming his cortex is switched off, liberating his soul to travel elsewhere. The brain acts as a filter. Introducing certain chemicals, such as LSD, radically alters the cerebral symphony. Humans undeniably have the capacity for extraordinary states of consciousness, however they're generated. The real controversy is how to interpret them. While I generally lean toward a skeptical view, reductionism can sometimes go awry. Carl Sagan, for example, once theorized in Broca's brain that near-death experiences might be vestigial birth memories from unconscious recollections of traveling down the birth canal, neglecting to note that individuals delivered by caesarean report the same types of NDEs. This kind of reductivism can cross into absurd territory, offering us less insight rather than more. Though I appreciate Feynman's skepticism, he was at least willing to experiment and entertain contrary ideas, insisting every OBE as a hallucination may be misleading if it dismisses potentially valuable data on how consciousness behaves when stripped of sensory input. Even our usual waking state, shaped by incoming stimuli, can be somewhat hallucinatory, as many studies on visual perception affirm. I've found deep meditation reveals aspects of the mind not easily noticed in eyes-open consciousness. While these transcendent encounters might say nothing about the external world, they reveal plenty about consciousness as a virtual simulator and how easily we can feel absolute certainty about purely internal phenomena. The real danger lies in conflating OBEs or NDEs with external reality, forgetting they may exist on a separate plane that doesn't necessarily overlap with the physical, at least epistemologically. In my college and university classes, I frequently stress that the original sin of humankind may not be nibbling from the tree of knowledge, but rather believing that our present or past or future neural state discloses how the universe actually is. We are inevitably trapped by knowledge boundaries, forced to trust whatever mental state we're in at the moment. We get caught in our own magical worlds, where image becomes reality and effect becomes cause. I'm not sure how to overcome this impasse, other than acknowledging that consciousness contains a library of possible states of awareness, and cautioning ourselves not to overestimate any one state's reach. The hypnagogic state. It's easy to see visions during meditation if you haven't slept for a couple of days. Hypnagogia, the transitional state before and after sleep, can produce striking apparitions of light and sound. But how we interpret these phantasms is strongly shaped by our underlying theories. John Lilly, whose pioneering work revealed how consciousness behaves when deprived of stimuli, realized how powerfully our preconceived models transform inner experiences, whether triggered by meditation or hallucinogens. He concluded, "Your beliefs or theories determine which experiences you will or won't have, no matter what experiments you attempt. It's nearly impossible to test a theory in this domain if other beliefs prevent you from even encountering certain experiences." Set and setting is key. The mind's plasticity ensures that even a slight change in environment transforms experiences, whether induced by drugs or meditation. Late-night meditation on insufficient sleep often triggers vivid visions for me. Eyes shut, I see phenomena that feel as real as anything in waking life, including colorful, cascading rain that seem to drench my face. Phenomenologically, it's nearly indistinguishable from ordinary wakefulness. Because I'm familiar with visual hallucinations, I don't assign any special meaning to these illusions. Yet if I subscribe to a paradigm that prized these experiences as spiritual signposts, like Ekankar or MSIA, which value lucid dreaming, I'd undoubtedly interpret them far more positively. Lilly provides an example in his autobiography. In deep isolation, one may sense other people's presence or receive communications from remote sources. If you believe in telepathy, you'll likely conclude these messages truly came from a distant mind. Within that worldview, the experience is real. If you don't believe in telepathy, encountering the same phenomenon leads you to conclude you must be hallucinating. Ironically, Lilly later had what he interpreted as real encounters with otherworldly entities in his tank, often under the influence of ketamine, whereas the Tibetan Bardo Thodol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, takes a more skeptical stance, describing such entities as illusions. Evans Wentz writes, "All phenomena are transient, illusory, unreal, non-existent apart from the mind that perceives them. In reality, no beings exist anywhere, not gods, nor demons, nor spirits. None of them have any independent existence. They arise from our yearning for sensation." Lilly countered critics by suggesting that labeling everything hallucination becomes a trash bin concept, dismissing a wide variety of unconventional but potentially significant mental events. Thus arises the enduring impasse, mysticism versus neurology, or superluminal versus mundane, touching on more paradoxes than we'd expect. A noteworthy example is how a limited worldview can trap an otherwise rational person into believing something at odds with common sense. Lilly explains, a behaviorist, among the most skeptical psychologists, might assume the brain can't generate experiences without external stimuli. If, in the tank, he experiences something seemingly external with no real source nearby, he may feel compelled to adopt belief in telepathy. That's the only explanation acceptable within a worldview that doesn't allow any purely internal experience, let alone hallucinations. Paradoxically then, someone who disbelieves in the psyche might end up embracing psychic communication. What's unusual about this theoretic prefiguring is that if it isn't guarded carefully, it can have grave outcomes. A person could be labeled psychotic, not because of what they experienced, but because they adopt a forbidden explanatory model. As Lilly predicted, any normal, healthy individual might have bizarre experiences that feel completely real. If they believe in them, they'll perceive them as actual. If they don't, they'll label them as unreal. But if that person visits a psychiatrist claiming these experiences are real, the psychiatrist may consider them hallucinations, possibly psychosis. Conversely, if the same person deems them unreal, the psychiatrist is less likely to suspect mental pathology. Context determines content. Our preset mental frameworks prearrange how we interpret inner experiences. This gives rise to a neural paradox in which one's conclusions hinge not on the experience itself, but on the individual's beliefs or opinions about that experience. These beliefs, in turn, often exist before the experiences occur. In his classic The Center of the Cyclone, Lilly shared how, after encountering fantastical beings and other universes, he realized the difference between sounding sane or insane to an outside observer depended on whether he expressed faith in the vision's objective reality or called them hallucinations. It also mattered to him personally because some journeys were so terrifying that considering them hallucinatory nightmares allowed him to dismiss their power, while for others who took them as real, the fear could become inescapable. As Lilly observed, explanations and theories are essentially beliefs about the mind and the universe. A certain belief might be true or might not be, but it absolutely restricts what experiences one can have. How then can a science of consciousness progress if our neural preconceptions already shape our mental explorations from the outset? Lilly's short answer, which has become his most famous philosophical maxim, is, in the province of the mind, what is believed to be true either is true or becomes true, within limits discovered through experience and experimentation. These further limits are themselves beliefs to be transcended. In the province of the mind, there are no limits. In other words, if consciousness is a virtual simulator, it can simulate almost anything given sufficient inputs. The sticking point is that a simulating brain is restricted by what it believes is feasible, shaped further by a culture that sets boundaries for what can be widely accepted in any era. Overstepping these boundaries is challenging, as it can lead to social isolation, and is risky, because there's a fine line between acting as if something might be real and acting as if something truly is real. Richard Feynman once warned new Caltech graduates, "The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool." This is wise advice, but the trouble lies in the mind's innate penchant for self-deception. Every experience, inner or outer, is not the thing in itself, as Kant long ago noted, but the result of filtering processes that color what we perceive. Recognizing the mind as a top-notch simulator doesn't free us from ongoing simulations, because even that realization is part of the simulation. We inhabit a neural paradox akin to an infinite hall of mirrors, where what appears real and solid may, on closer inspection, be just an image of an image of an image, ad infinitum.